So we're holding Hilchos Taaruvot, the Siman Chof. We've already gone through the concept of what a birya is. That's the heading of the Siman, that a birya, efilu be'elef lo botel, a birya, a small creature, it could be a big creature, is not botel even in 1,000. We're used to the halachas of bitul, whether in Roiv or in 60. We spoke about a few that are more than 60. But here it appears that there's no bitul, and very few items have no bitul. We've spoken about the examples of those items, things that also are filled with mashu, like kila kerem, avodah zarah, yain nesach. And then there were some isurim that are special, let's call them special, that are not botul afilu be'elef, as it is called here. We will be learning the following isur, which is dover roilis kabed, which is also something significant. A large piece, probably, usually. Roilis kabed means that which is fit to be served. And dover sheish lo matirin, something that will be permissible at some other time, so therefore there's no bitul, the halachas of bitul are not shaykh for it. And here we're talking about a birya. And the example that the Mechaber gave for a birya was like an ant, nemala, of tameh, an unclean bird, gid hanoshe, the sciatic nerve, and ever min hachai, a limb of a living animal. And when it says a limb, it includes organs. Because when we say a limb, generally speaking, a limb includes the sinews, the bones, and the meat. And even if there's, and the chidush by ever min hachai is, even if there's no kazayis basar, but this is an ever min hachai, so you're mitzaref all three elements of the ever, the sinews, the bones, everything would be mitzaref.
Not the skin.
Not the skin, no. Right, not the skin.
Sure. The skin is not considered.
Yeah, it's not considered food. Exactly. Very good point. Yeah, we're talking about the actual edible items, and bones are edible. So that's the chidush by ever min hachai, that everything is included in the shir of the kazais. We hold that you need a kazais for achila. That is the halacha. That even though a never min hachai may be smaller than kazais, which we'll talk about soon, nonetheless, for achila purposes, the issue of achila we learn out applies pretty much the same across the board. You need a kazais. Chatzi shir may be also min Torah, of course, but to get malchus, you need a kazais to eat. Of the item that is forbidden to eat. No, the bones, the sinews, the meat. A kazais of that particular item would be mechayev malchus, according to the Torah. Less than that, there's no isur, there's no malchus. There's still an isur, but there's no malchus.
We have an opinion that says that.
Right, that's one of those things that I spent some time verifying. Spent quite a bit of time, and it's really I like to point out again. It's so much helpful. It's so much better to look at the mekor. You know, I went to the Crazy Placey to see exactly what he says. I was trying to find the Chuvas Pnei Arya. I couldn't find it, but I seem to, by looking at the Bach, by looking at various others who speak about the same issues that we will talk about soon, I was able to see what the question really is, because we had some doubts about the less than a kazais. So we'll get into that in momentarily. But as far as the isur, as far as what is a birya, we have these few items as examples, plus beitza sheyesh ba'efroach, an egg that has a somewhat developed chick, not fully developed necessarily. V'chayotze b'hem, and the Mechaber says that this is not the entire list. There might be others that are similar to these. They do have some common ground,
Properties.
I guess, common properties that make them a birya. And, of course, any one of these would afilu be'elef lo batela. And then the Mechaber goes on to give examples or conditions, criteria of what would make it a birya. And what he has done, of course, is not taken the four, which he mentions, and by the way, the Pri Megadim has a fifth one, but we won't get into that right now. We're going by these four criteria that makes a birya. But before we review that criteria, let's just make a differentiation between what the Torah calls a birya and what the Chachamim are calling a birya. What's the difference? This halacha of birya is not batul be'elef is a Rabbanan halacha. right? We know that.
The shear or the whole Indian not
The whole Inyan that a beer is not bottled even be'elef is a derabbanan.
But that's a question.
Right.
The thing itself is deraisa aser, but it's not bottled.
Well, obviously these items are forbidden midin deraisa. There is a din of things that are asur midrabbanan, whether they are birya or not.
And they're also not bottled.
Yeah, we will eventually talk about that. Yeah, we'll eventually get to that. Yeah, but here we're dealing with an isur deraisa. You're right. Right now we're dealing with an isur deraisa, but the shear is a derabbanan. That a birya is not bottled be'elef is a shear derabbanan. In other words, these things would also be bottled be'roiv, midin Torah.
You're saying derisive, they're derisive by what?
We're not talking about here a food item that is also by rabbinic decree. The shear is midrabanan. That's correct.
So we have here it says that the din that they are not bottled is banan.
That's right. The din that they're not bottled be'elef. They still need a bitul.
Okay, so that's not derisive, that's banan.
That's correct. Because midaraisa, let's say you have a bug that fell into food, it would be bottled beroiv.
The bottle barov
Is the raisa.
Is the derisive, but the bottle is not in 1,000 is a derisive.
Not even 1,000. That's a rabbinic decree. Right.
So the isser, though you sister is derisive, but the fact that it's not in 1,000 is banan.
That's correct. Yeah. Okay. So now, before we go to this to the criteria, I think it's important to distinguish between a birya in terms of the Torah and a birya in terms of the Rabbanan. What's a birya in terms of the Torah? A little creature that is not even the size of a finger. Forget about his eyes. Small. An nemala. Right? You tell me, does it make a difference if I eat a nemala that is so small, or whether I eat chaz v'shalom, a piece of treif meat that is a kazais? No. There's no difference.
In terms of what? There's no
Of an isser. The nemala does not have a kazais isser.
Right. So
and we've said till now that from achila we learn for the most part the shear of achila to be over a lav, like Ever Minachai, would be a kazais.
And that's the rice.
Yeah, you need a kazais to actually, you can't eat less, but to get malchus, you need a kazais.
So are you distinguishing with punishment? Is that what you're doing?
No. What I'm saying is...
between the isser and the punishment. Two
different things? Because you're saying the third, so is eating the kazayas of meat, you're saying that both...
What I'm saying is, a little bit differently. The concept of birya is twofold. There is a birya that the Torah is talking about, the Torah, not the Chachamim. And that is something small, like an ant, cockroach. Something very, very small.
Small but complete.
Yes, exactly. Small but complete. And not just complete, there's other conditions too. But complete is very important. If you were to eat the small ant, even though there's no kazayas there, this is a full birya. It just happens to be a miniature creature of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's one of those things that the Torah says, sheretz ha-shoretz ala-aretz. You have animals that do not have split hoofs, that are not kosher. And you have crawling creatures that are not kosher. Different category species. You have fish that are not kosher because they don't have, fins and scales. So they're made in all these categories of creatures that are not clean or pure animals. Some are very small, less than a kazais. And guess what? It's forbidden to eat them, and you would get malchus for it.
In other words, they have the same din exactly like the size of a larger isser.
Exactly. The Torah. A birya is a birya, and when the Torah says don't eat this, what we understand from the prohibition, do not eat, it's whether it's big or small. And there's no shear for that. If you eat the entire birya.
And the punishment is the same.
It's the same. Yes, it's an ant.
Punishment is the same.
Yeah.
Now, I want to add, ostensibly, that would also be true for a half a kazai of a foreleg that was ripped off a living animal.
That's what we're going to talk about that soon. That's what we're going to talk about. That's the question, that's the doubt, part of the doubt that we had last week. Okay, but I just wanted to make this clear, that when the Torah talks about a birya, and it says do not eat, it does not distinguish between the size of what this animal creature is, how big it is. Don't eat this, regardless of its size.
So
No, we didn't get to the Rabbanan yet, right? We didn't.
That's the shear.
No, we haven't gotten to the Rabbanan. Right now we're talking about the birya in terms of the Torah. What is the Torah? Does the Torah use the term birya? Not in the Torah itself, you won't find it, but the Chachamim explained that when the Torah says lo toichal, it did not differentiate between a large creature and a small creature. If you're eating the entire creature, even if it's so small, it's usher and there's malchus.
But we don't do that, right?
What
Somebody eats an ant for malchus, are they?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. They ate the entire ant, even though it's so small. They ate an entire birya. We haven't gotten to the Rabbanan's concept of birya.
Now, is there a shir zman in it? Or they would have
Everything is always kedei achilas pras.
Kedei achilas pras. So if they
right.
had half the end,
Of course.
and then 2 minutes later another half,
Right.
of the end, it would
Sure.
still be
Kedei achilas pras, for the most part, that I recall.
Even though when they ate the first half of the end, it wasn't a complete birya.
Right.
That's what I'm asking.
By Avim and Achai, it could make a difference.
But by an end,
By birya, it does not make a
It
difference.
starts to become a complete birya.
Yes, yes. Sure. You eat the entire birya, even though it's a small little creature. Little shrimps, oysters. There's no kazais there, maybe. So what? That's the size of it. It's also min Torah, and there's malchus for it.
It has to be visible.
Okay.
No. Right?
Yeah.
Because you can get down.
We'll talk about that maybe on Thursday. What I like to do on Thursday is
Not
go
even microscopic.
a whole shir, a little bit of a shir about bugs. Just bugs, because it's related to this
Some
Siman.
bugs are so tiny.
Yes. So maybe we'll include that which you cannot see. Right? You need a microscope before you eat something. Yeah, no, you don't. Yeah.
So if I was served on half an egg,
Right,
and I ate the half,
right.
and then I was served another half of a different ant or the same ant, I'm saying, of a different ant or the same, within a sheer prasachila.
Yeah.
With the two halves combined to a berry, then it would sound as though I ate a whole ant.
From two different halves.
Two different ants.
I would assume yes, because you've eaten a birya. Yeah. I would assume yes.
After the whole creature?
Yes.
You don't eat
If you
half
just
the
if you do not eat a complete intact creature, you're not chayav. It has to be a whole birya.
So it's a veneer. Because when I ate the first half ant,
In a way, it's veneer. You could say that, right? Okay, but anyway, let's not get lost in this. It's just a little small distinction. Birya of the Torah is asur, even though it's small. And what we're talking about is a different idea, slightly. We're talking about halachas of bittul. So the Chachamim were machmir, that if you have a birya of sorts, forget about the size of the birya now. If you have something that is, we will call a birya because of the weight, because of its importance somehow, because it meets certain criteria, and if it meets certain criteria to be called a birya, according to us, it will not be batal afilu be'elef. Okay? So the Rabbanan are saying a completely different din over here. It's a halacha that has to do with bittul. Nothing to do with eating right now. Alright? Eating, as far as they're concerned, for the most part, if you eat a kazais of treif, something treif, you get malchus. Less than kazais, no. There happens to be that if you ate a small ant, you get malchus too. But that's not the question here. The question here is this going to be batal or not? That's what we're concerned with. That's what we're learning in Hilchos Taaruvot. And in Hilchos Taaruvot, the halacha is that if something fits the criteria of a birya, it's not batal afilu be'elef. And what were the criteria? It has to be something that from the very start it was asur all along, right? It has to be something that has chiyus, life, or part of something that had life, as opposed to what? As opposed to wheat. It may be a birya, a kernel of wheat, but it has nothing to do with life, not related to life. It has to be something that if you would cut it up, it would lose its shame, its name. And number 4, which is a very important condition, it has to be shalom, complete, intact. If you were to be missing a leg, this bug, it's not a birya anymore.
So if
Right? Yeah.
you had the whole bug and without the leg, all the pieces.
Well, then you could see it. When you could see the birya,
No, but I'm
it's
saying
less of an issue.
The item itself does not have to showing in front of you. The severed part of the
yes,
view.
yeah, but it's no longer a birya.
It's not a birya, it's severed, is it?
It's severed. It's not a birya. Yeah.
Even if it's all there.
If it's disfigured, the Pri Megadim says too. That's considered also that no longer a birya. Missing a leg is no longer a birya.
aren't most ants?
Not really.
Not really?
No.
That's the way it is.
I've seen bugs intact in soup and all kinds of things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
lettuce.
Oh yeah. Oh, lettuce. They're still alive sometimes. Yeah. I'm talking about dead, but intact with the wings and everything. They're very small. Yeah, you can see them. For them to really be crushed, they've had to have gone through something. Heat by itself will not necessarily disfigure it. Yeah.
Question on the prima gardens fifth condition. Do that.
No, it's okay.
There's a question on it.
There's a question on the prima
I have a
gardens?
question on the prima gardens condition.
Okay, go ahead then. Yeah. I wasn't really going to talk about the prima gardens condition because it's, it's in some ways it's obvious. In some ways it's obvious what he says, but it's just an extra,
But I was wondering how Ibn Achai would not meet the prima gardens fifth condition.
Okay, so that's a good question. As far as the condition,
I don't know if everybody knows
No,
what I'm
so
talking about.
that's
I don't know
what-
if everybody knows what the prima gardens fifth
okay, so that's why let's talk a little bit about the conditions. We did say last week that these conditions are all necessary according to the Mechaber and the Ramah, perhaps. Not everyone, not all the Rishonim require all these conditions. You look at the Ran, you look at the Rush, you won't find all four. You'll find one missing in their list of criteria. They have about 3. Because all these conditions, where are they learned from? From the various Gemaras. They are inferred. They're not very clear. So therefore, they all have different criteria, but the Mechaber summarized all 4. He requires all 4. But in Nachiname, what you will find is, for example, Gida Nosh and Eivim Minachai are quite different than the rest of them. They're not living. They come from something that was alive. They were usher in the very beginning.
Did you actually mention this condition?
Yeah.
Not everyone has them.
Yeah. Go ahead. What is the
It
prima
says
gardens?
here it's Gufo Muso, so in a court.
All right.
So it says exclusive. It says not only usher is only. So if it's cray, it's not the thing itself isn't.
No, it was right. It wasn't really usher in its essence, the Prima Garden says. It's just something external caused it to be usher.
So
Without that external factor, it would have been okay.
So I think an Eber Min Achai, an animal's not born with an Eber Min Achai.
Right.
It's not torn off. He's born with the limb, but the limb's attached.
That's correct.
So it only becomes an issue. Limb's not attached.
Right.
No.
You're right.
So then I would think it wouldn't meet the maybe he's saying the limb's already attached or something. Even if you take it
Eber
off.
Min Achai in some ways was always usher. You cannot have any piece of the animal, whether it's Eber Min Achai or Basar Min Achai, which is a separate Isser of Nevela, prior to slaughtering it properly. In other words, you have no permission to take it. So in some ways it's similar. But I agree with you that from this list, Gida Noshe and Eber Min Achai are unique. Yeah, they're unique, and they're of course considered barrier by the Chachamim because they've always been Asr, and because of the serious prohibition that the Torah ascribes to them. In other words, there's a separate Isser to them. And that Isser is there from the very beginning. So they're unique. They are different. They're not something that has life, but they've come from something that had life.
When we say
Yeah.
Buria,
Right.
the idea, the thought you get automatically is
Right.
something that is complete and alive, a whole animal.
Right.
And now when you say Eber Min Achai,
Exactly.
you're talking about a piece,
A piece,
of an animal.
yeah.
So it would seem
Right.
So it would seem that it violates the whole animal concept.
Right.
And also, according to the Prima Gadim, it has to be something that in category is Aser. And here you're talking about a permitted animal. Had it been slaughtered, you would be able to eat the stick, but because it was taken from the animal
Before,
without,
right.
That's why it became forbidden.
Right.
So it would seem like that would violate that as well. But wouldn't Eber Min Achai and the sciatic nerve be a category of its own that shares these aspects, even though it does not provide the rationale for the naming?
Yes, that's what I was saying. In other words,
The name doesn't seem to
the
apply
name
to
doesn't
it,
seem
but
to-
it simply shares the halacha.
so that's what. Yeah, that's why this name Birya is different. That's why I gave you the little introduction about the Torah's concept of Birya versus this. This is a different concept. But you're right, because this criteria or some of the criteria may be lacking in Eber Min Achai and Gida Noshe, some would not necessarily agree that this is a real Birya. Yeah, some would have a question, or at least would have. Nobody is going to come and say, "Okay, it's okay." The Mechaber says it's us, or it's a birya, and that's the way we paskin. But there is definitely a valid. It's a good question as to why.
It's confusing.
No, yeah, why make this one so unique more than anything else? Yeah, but of course they are unique in some way. Not necessarily in all the ways do they share all the criteria, but they share some. And some is good enough. Even though Mechaber says, I need all four, these happen to be close enough to have all four. That's pretty much it.
There are other reasons why they share. The Torah uses the formulation.
No, but this is not Torah. This is a rabbinic decree. But let's talk a little bit about Ever Min HaChai, because that's what we discussed last week. There is a machlokes, there is a whole discussion about what happens if the Ever Min HaChai is less than a kazais. Is it considered a birya or not? Remember that? So you can find it in the Pischei Tshuva, if you want to look it up. It will not give you too much more clarity about what's going on, just the Pischei Tshuva, because he's very, very brief. He brings down this opinion and this opinion. But you do have those that say that Ever Min HaChai that is less than a kazais is not a birya, does not have the din of birya. And you have the crazy placey, and I think the Pri Megadim, even though he has a tzorech chiyun, crazy placey and the Pri Megadim, they would hold that it's still called a birya. So what's going on really here? So we had some doubts about what the question was. Did the question apply to an Ever Min HaChai of which you took a kazais?
Or less? Less than a kazais?
No, you took a kazais. I'm sorry. Are we talking about an Ever Min HaChai of which you took a piece that's less than a kazais, right? Does that still retain the din of birya because it came from an Ever Min HaChai? Or are we talking about an Ever Min HaChai that intrinsically, I guess, happens to be smaller than a kazais? The kidney of some small animal, the organ of some small animal that it's no kazais there.
And you eat the whole thing.
And you eat the whole thing.
Or maybe even...
No, we're not talking about eating right now. We're talking about bittul. Will it still retain the din of bittul? Because when it comes to eating, everybody seems to agree that you will always need to eat a kazais.
What do you mean? We just said you can eat a little tiny...
That's birya of the Torah. I'm talking about Ever Min HaChai.
Ever Min HaChai is not the rice of birya?
No. A birya...
So in other words, an Ever Min HaChai...
Ever Min HaChai is also to eat. It's an Ever... If somebody now takes a piece, an Ever Min HaChai, okay? Takes a limb, an organ, without slaughtering the animal. And it has to be a clean animal, right? Remember that? Then for a Jew at least, it has to be a clean animal. And he eats it, a kazais of it, he's over an Isser of Ever Min HaChai.
Right, a kazais. So if he eats less than a kazais...
Let's say the animal died, right? And without shchita, and he would to eat a kazais of that dead animal, he's eating a kazais of an avela.
Right.
There's no Ever Min HaChai anymore. Right?
So if I understand you correctly, it's a little complicated. Then when you have an Ever Min HaChai, the Isser of eating an Ever Min HaChai is the Oraisa.
Sure.
To include it in the category of birya is the Rabbanan.
Yeah, the fact that Chachamim call it a birya is a Rabbanan.
Whereas an ant is a birya de Oraisa.
For purposes of consumption.
Of consumption.
Not of bittul.
Not of bittul. For the purpose of consumption. So the whole question of bittul of all of these is the Rabbanan.
Yes.
But that Ever Min HaChai is also legabe consumption. The Ever Min HaChai is also legabe consumption de Oraisa birya?
No.
So the Ever Min HaChai as a birya, even legabe consumption, is only the Rabbanan, whereas an ant would be a de Oraisa.
Yes.
With respect to consumption.
In a sense, yes. Yeah.
So when it comes to consumption, which is the model, this is the reference point.
Yeah.
So in the reference point, the Ever Min HaChai would be a birya de Oraisa. An ant would be a birya de Oraisa, and an Ever Min HaChai regarding consumption would be a birya de Rabbanan.
Yes.
So now the question is, does that factor into the question of kazais or less than kazais? Does it make a difference that whether it's a birya de Oraisa or a birya de Rabbanan, when we're coming to talk about the bittul and our machmir, that even something that's less a kazais, if it's a birya, is not misbakla in 1,000? Is that the question you're asking?
Say it one more time.
I'm telling you, it's complex. Yeah. We have how do we know about birya?
Right.
Birya comes from eating. The Oraisa.
That's
where we learn it from.
Right.
Now, with respect to eating, we have two categories of birya. The Oraisa birya, like an ant or a cockroach, and a Rabbanan birya. like an Aver min Achai.
No. We
That's what I thought you just said.
We don't have yet the concept of birya by the Rabbanon, for consumption purposes.
So by Aver min Achai, we never talk about birya.
No. We're talking
By consumption.
Right. We're only talking about a nemola. We're talking about little bugs, little things that are also.
So there is no Durabanan birya legabe consumption.
Say on that.
There is no din of the Rabbanon.
There is no type of birya with respect to consumption.
Yes,
that
there
would
is.
That would be by rabbinical decree.
Yes, there is in some ways, because the Rambam holds, the Rambam explains, and that's what we need to see. We can further look into it. The Rambam says that there is a difference between something that is a birya, legabe consumption too.
And what's the other one? Difference between that and what else?
Okay. Now listen carefully. So maybe I should retract what I said in one way. The term birya can be applied, whether it's midrabanan or d'oraisa. I have to double check this. Even in consumption, in one very important way, by Ever min Achai. How? Listen carefully. Ordinarily, for me to eat something that is asur, I have to eat the meat, a kazais of the meat. But Ever min Achai, because it's called a birya, what's mitzvah for the kazais, still a kazais, is the sinews and the bones and the meat.
Now,
okay?
But
that's what the Rambam. That's
so
how the
because
Rambam
it's a
says.
Rabbanan, you'll never get malchus for eating it.
No, it'll be a d'oraisa. It'll be a d'oraisa. The Ever min Achai.
Would be a d'oraisa.
That's what I'm saying. So in that particular instant.
That's very interesting. Oh,
yes.
Wow. Okay.
In that particular instant, I'm almost sure that the oraisa prohibition by Ever min Achai, for consumption purposes, would include the bones and the sinews of this Aver.
Because it's a birya.
Comes along Toises. There's an interesting Toises, which may help us understand this Tshuva. Maybe Toises, according to Toises Shita, we don't hold. The Rambam doesn't hold like that. Is in order for you to be over Aver min Achai, you have to eat the entire Aver.
So you'd have to eat the bones.
The whole limb, whatever it is that you took. The whole thing.
If you take a piece of that animal and then you cut it in half and only eat the half, according to the Tosfos, you wouldn't be over the Ever min Achai.
You wouldn't.
Because you left half of it over.
Not only that, even the Rambam holds you're not over, because if you cut up the Ever min Achai, you cut it up, it has lost the din of birya. It has to be in its original form to be over and Ever min Achai. I mean, otherwise you're eating an avela. There is another isser on it, but not Ever min Achai.
So you would not have Ever min Achai if you would share it with someone.
Well,
It would only be nevela. It wouldn't be Ever min Achai.
Yeah, it wouldn't be. Yeah, supposedly. Yeah, yes, maybe. It depends. It depends. Not if you go by the Rambam, and you started eating it, and you ate a kazais of it, you didn't have to eat the whole thing, then you were already over, even if you're sharing the rest with someone else. But that someone else maybe is not over because there's no birya left. It's this. So it's very good you brought. So it's very good that you brought out this point, because this is a point that is further elaborated in Aruch HaShulchan, the Rambam, as far as how unique Ever min Achai is concerning the birya when it comes to consumption. Even though that we're not, you know where this is really applicable? In Siman Samach Beis. That's why I wasn't sure if I should get into it. Samach Beis is Ever min Achai. Let me just double check. I didn't forget. Yeah, Samach Beis. If you learn Yore Deah, Siman Samach Beis is Hilchos Ever min Achai. Okay, if we have time, maybe we'll do it Thursday a little bit, real quickly. When does it apply? When does it apply? You're not allowed to give a goy an Ever min Achai, because it's Lifnei Iver Lotiten Michshol. He's not allowed to have it. And by him, there's no Isser of Kazais. It's even B'mashahu, because the Shi'urim is only for Yisrael, not for Goyim.
And also, I think when the animal is still kicking, by a Jew, it's not called
exactly. By Goy, yes, there's several differences. By an unkosher animal, for him it applies across the board. By us, it's only by a kosher animal, a clean animal.
So the bottom line, because right now I'm a little confused, the bottom line, did we now come to conclude that Ever min Achai is a birya d'oraisa, legabe eat?
Yeah, even Gid HaNosher. Gid HaNosher is considered the birya. So therefore, the question is, if you're chayev on it, if you ate the whole Gid HaNosher and there was no kazais. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about here. That's what we're looking into right now. So it does have a din of birya in some ways, right? Not so much for consumption like in the mullah, that even a tiny size, but chashivas wise, it does have a certain chashivas, either in bittul, as we were seeing right now, or in the example that you were giving, that in case, that even in consumption, if I were to eat Ever min achai, it would be called a birya as far as the tziruf of everything combining together would make it would make the kazais. In other words, there would still be a kazais, but it would be different than a meat, just regular meat. So that's where the one difference would be. And in Giddah Nasha there were also. So anyway, let's quickly talk about this point and where we left off. So if an Ever min achai is less than a kazais, that's what there's. Are we talking about a piece of the Ever min achai, the original Ever min achai that is less than a kazais, or are we talking about an Ever min achai that in itself is smaller than a kazais? And what's the question? Does it still have a din of birya? Is it still as important that the Chachamim, Mirabanan, would say that it would not be batel be'elef? That's what the machlokes is. So we had a question, which one are we talking about here? It appears to me, after looking into the makor of the words, everybody, unless there's an exception here with the Pnei Aryeh and the other, which I didn't get a chance to check. Yeah, he brings here only the Pnei Aryeh, but there is another Achron that talks about it too. It appears to be from the Bach, from the Crazy Placey. It appears to be that they're all talking about an Aver Minachai from that happens to be in itself smaller than the Kazais naturally, like the organ of a small animal. In other words, the Aver, the wing or whatever it is, happens to be smaller than a Kazais. It's still called a birya. Or is it not? That's the question. Now, why not? The question is why yes? Well, since the relationship here between Ever min achai and other isurim legabe malchus is kazais, right? The whole thing is based on kazais. The whole thing is based on malchus. If you're not going to have malchus, then why should we call it the birya? In other words, if it's not on the same level as a regular Isser is, then why should I be machmir here anymore? I am machmir when it's at least on the same level of another Isser. Just that here it's not batel be'elef. Legabe malchus, legabe kazais, right? But once it's not on the same level as an ordinary Isser, is smaller than a kazais, why should I call it a birya? Maybe it loses the din of birya, the chashivas of it. So some want to say yes, because it's tied to malchus and tied to kazais. In other words, they're all pretty much on the same level. Once you don't have that, then it doesn't have any more in chashivas than the rest of them. And the crazy flacy, Rabbi Elyahu appears to also agree, says no. The fact that it's an Ever min achai, and that's just happens to be the size of it, it's smaller than a kazais, it's still called an Ever min achai. It still has chashivas. It's still Ever min achai. And now, we are all in agreement that if you were to eat it, there's no kazais. And it's not an emolo here, right? We're all in agreement that if you were to eat a small little thing, there's no kazais. And there's no malchus. That's because in order for you to be over and Ever min achai, you also need the shir of kazais like by trefus, nevelis. Just that by Ever min achai, it's different in one area of consumption that you can combine for the kazais, the bones and the sinews.
So then, but the better you also combine the bones and the...
Well, of course, yes, of course. You combine the whole thing, the whole Aver is not bottle. So the question is, what about if it's less than a kazais? So I even though we had some doubts, I don't think anybody is really saying that if you took a piece less than a kazais from an original Ever min achai, that will still have a din birya. Why? Because we know that birya itself, if you take away a leg, if you disfigure it, it loses the chashivas of birya. So why would I think that if you take a small piece of an Ever min achai, it still should retain the din of birya? No, it doesn't. An Ever min achai has to also be intact. An Ever min achai also has to be in its original form to take a piece of it that's small, the kazayis, is not really what we're talking about here. The discussion therefore relates to most likely only in a case where their whole aver minachai, regardless of whether it has bones or if it's an organ, it's still an aver minachai. If it happens to be smaller than a kazayit, according to Grace place, it's still an aver minachai, and it still has a din of birya. But there, everybody else is saying, well, why? The whole thing is that the rabbanan, right? If there's no kazayis, that means you don't get malchus. Then why give it the chashivas of a birya? You follow me? That's the whole question. Why give it the chashivas anymore? The whole thing is dependent on malchus, dependent on kazayis. So if it's less than a kazayis, just because it's intact, it's not an emullah, it's not an ant, where the Torah says, don't eat regardless of the size. This is just a rabbinic decree of a birya. Do you still call it a birya? So Krishna says, yes, because it's a birya. It looks like one. It behaves like one, regardless of the size. So anyway, so that's basically the machlokes.
So when you say this is a rabbinical birya, what you mean to say is that bittul, that it's not misbatl, it's a rabbinical decree that is directed at something that's daraisa called the birya.
Yes, that's correct. Yes. All right, that was that. Okay, real quickly, the next issue.
The only thing that you would have is because it doesn't count as fish.
No.
And for
You have the eggs. I mean, that's also a problem with Eva Minachai. In Siman, if you have a chance, look.
if it was a partial one.
No.
I don't mean you didn't understand me. The reproductory organ. Did I call it right? The eggs. They're called the beitzim. Okay, we're not talking about the.
I didn't understand.
Yeah, right.
Okay, now I do.
Right. Yeah. There are things that are smaller that would be Eva Minachai. Sure. All right. Then the next one that was interesting in that same seif was a Beitza Sheyesh Bo Efroach. Very briefly, this one is it's a little bit strange. And all the Achronim have a hard time with the Mechaber here. What is he talking about here? Beitza Sheyesh Bo Efroach. Now we know that an Efroach is partially developed is also for us to eat, whether it's midrabanan or midraisa, depending on how far it is developed. I mean, we have to shecht it once it's fully developed. You just can't eat it. So that we know. But what exactly makes this birya? And what's the heichetimtza of this? A beitza sheyesh bo efrach. Well, you see it. And if you think about the questions of the Achronim, they're really tough. I mean, what was the Mechaber's scenario? What are the circumstances? He calls a beitza sheyesh bo efrach a birya. But what's the circumstances? You could see it, can't you? What is it mixed with that you can't see? What's the question really here? So there's a machlokes, the shach and the mechaber, as far as what makes this beitza sheyesh bo efrach a birya to begin with. The shach says it's the beitza, it's not the efrach. The efrach is just a factor that makes the beitza a birya, but the beitza is the birya. What's the nafkamina? Whereas the mechaber, the Beis Yosef is saying, no, it's the efrach itself, the birya, not the beitza. What's the nafkamina? Very interesting nafkamina would come out of this. According to the shach, we know one thing about biryas. If they're merusak, if they are shredded, completely destroyed, they lost the din of birya. If that efrach would ever fall apart, the shach says, I don't care. Because my birya is the beitza, not the efrach. The efrach has made the beitza birya.
So now the beitza retains.
It would still retain. That's right. It would still retain the din, even though later on, somehow through the cooking, it became destroyed. It's still a birya. Interesting. But the mechaber, of course, once it loses its din status of birya, then of course it's gone, because he says the efrach is what makes this a birya. So the question is, there are various explanations given as to what the scenario is here. The Aruch HaShulchan has an interesting one. He says we're talking about where you can slightly detect by looking at the egg that there's an efrach growing, and then it got mixed up with many, many eggs. So if you wouldn't call it a birya, and it would be too difficult for you to find the egg, it would be batal.
But the minyan.
We're not holding there yet.
Oh, okay.
not everybody holds a davar shebeminyan. So we'll get to that.
Okay.
You're right. Good question, but right, you follow me. So the Aruch HaShulchan has an interesting scenario. I saw at one time the efrach developing in the beitza, Then it got lost in other baits. And now it's too difficult for me to find. When it's too difficult, I don't have to. Not if it's a birya. So if it's a birya, then you have no choice. You better look for it because it's not bottle. So that's the Orcha Shulchan's attempt to figure out what kind of a situation can you have this pose a problem.
Because otherwise it would be bottle bar.
A little bit more than over. Remember, Shishim 61 extra. The beta, if it's a beta, depending if it has dam or not, depending. If it's not a birya, it could be a situation similar to the other with beitzim, yes. But it's a birya. At least what we need to know for now for this halacha is that if you ever have something like that, it's a semi-developed creature, it also has a din of birya. But there's no need to get into more into that because you may come up with a different scenario, and that it may be true.
What would you end up doing with something? I mean, you can't.
You have to remove it. You have to throw it away.
Just throw it away.
You throw it away. Yeah. Now,
before they were cooked together or after they were cooked?
Right now we're assuming they're cooked because we're going to be dealing with the plita in a moment.
So you throw it away and that makes the other eggs were cooked together?
Yes. Now we have a problem if there's plita or not. Okay? If they let out, if there's tam. So depending what you cooked over here. Okay? So if it's we're going to talk about it real quickly. Anyway, let's go on, and as we go on, we will come across the other points. Davar sif beis. Davar shu birya shenizbah shel heter, im eno makiro akol osor, varoite benoisin tam. So now we're talking about a birya, right? That somehow was cooked with the heter. If you recognize it, if you don't recognize it, you can't find it. Everything is also because it's not bottled. And the roite, as far as the sauce, it's benoisin tam. It all depends on if you have 60 or not. Similar situation like anything else. So everything is aser, the solids, it's not bottled, but the roitev is just a matter of tam. If it's 60 against it, you have the regular halachas of bitu because it's based on tam. The solids, the yovish things are not bottled because it's a birya. A birya is here. Okay? So far so good. Now, even though there's a noisin tam, if you have a chance to look at the shach already, a lot of times the shach brings, and the Taz bring things that they will be discussing later on in Hilchos Taaruvot. And this is an example. When talking about birya and noisin tam, he says just remember that there are biryas who have a very, very bad taste. It just happens to be that later on we will be talking about that. That's only with this type of plita that we're concerned with is with the chicken was a treif bird. But if you're talking about shkotzim and remosim, if you're talking about those ants and all these things that are meusim, then remember we have halachas about that they're noisin tam lefgam, that may not be concerned. So if you talk about plita, it's only when it's not a noisin tam lefgam. It's only when that's not the issue. Okay, that's an important point regarding the plita. Imakiro, if you recognize it. Zorko, you throw it away. Vacherim varoitev so she'ebam samach kenegdoi. And then all you need is, between everything else in the roitev, 60 against it. Chutz mi gida noshe, she'en time o oiser, de'en begidin benoisen tam. So the Mechaber brings down the halacha l'maiser begida noshe, even though it's also for us to eat in itself, but there's no plita, there's no tam. We paskin that ein begidin benoisen tam, machlokes in the Gemara, that there's no flavor coming out of the gid hanoshe, and therefore no problem as far as the tam. Just the gid hanoshe is a problem. So chutz begid shein tam oiser, the ein begid benoisen tam. Aval midrabanon shmanoi, the shuman, the fats around it, oiser, and therefore tzorich shishim kenegdoi, you need 60 against it. Lehatir haroitev, to be matir the roitev. Lefichach, therefore yerach shenizbah shel im gidoi, a leg that was cooked together with the gid hanoshe, imakiro zorko, if you recognize it, you throw it. V'chol hashar mutar, everything is mutar, miyesh bo samach kenegesh manoi. If you have 60 against the shuman. V'im eino makiro, if you don't recognize the gid hanoshe, kol hachatichas asuros, because it's a birya, right? The gid. V'im yesh bo kdero samach keneged hashuman, mutar haroitev. Then the roitev is mutar v'imlav osur. V'im nimoach hagid, if the gid was completely shattered And nimoyach is, I guess the better word for it would be completely melted, dissolved, is the correct word. Completely dissolved. Ve'eno nikar, then tzorach gam ken samach kenegdoi, then you need 60 even against it. Well, what happened to the birya? Well, it's dissolved, so it's not a birya. Right? Okay? Now, what do we have here in this last part of the sieve? We have several points. We have point number 1, en begidin benoisen tam. So, if you recognize the gid anosha, don't worry about flavors. Flavors about other things, yes, but not about gid anosha. Gid anosha is a birya, yes. It can cause you problems if it's cooked. If you don't recognize it, you're in trouble. Everything is usher. Roitev, no problem. There's no tam. Okay? The problem is if you don't recognize it. In other words, if you recognize it, you take it out. If you don't recognize it, everything is usher except for the roitev. Or, if you have shuman. If you have shuman, then we're machmir on the shuman of the gid anosha. If that was cooked together in the pot, you would need 60 against it.
This assumes that the set intact.
No, regardless.
I thought you said before that if you cut up into pieces or whatever.
Then it's not a birya. Anytime a birya is cut up, chopped up, disfigured, it lost the chashivas of birya, and it would be bottle b'shishim.
Does it still have the chashivas if it's chopped
No.
up? With love.
It's still asur. You still need shishim against it.
Shishim.
Shishim you still need because it's asur. It's an isur. But it doesn't have a din of birya
If it doesn't have a taste, you still need,
against it. Yes.
even though it doesn't have a taste.
Right. That's the question. Is why?
So if you cut
Okay.
it up, if you
Why would you need shishim against the gid? It's a good question. Now, there is one explanation that I saw because it's all a mixture of lach and it's a derabanan requirement of shishim, like min be'eno minoi. No, min be'eno minu be'yavish. It's a similar situation of min be'eno minu be'yavish. But I saw a better explanation. And that is, shishim? Who said? Mechaber said. But in reality, roiv should be enough. Roiv should be enough. And the only reason why we need shishim here is that they were machmir midirabanan, that to require shishim. Why? Let me see if I remember who says it. I don't remember who says it, but I saw someone explain very nicely. When the gid is nimoyach, when the whole gid anosh is dissolved, you're going to taste it. You're going to taste the gid. The gid doesn't really have flavor to us or other things, but you're going to taste the gid. Interesting.
In other words, you'll be eating a little bit.
You'll be eating the gid. Yeah. So you need shishim. Interesting. So anyway, it's a derabanan. It's all in derabanan. But because it's only a derabanan, the taz. I'm not sure about I'm not sure about the taz, but I know the primigodim, the prichodosh, the crazy placey, they're makel that you can use roiv v'shas adachak. If all you have is roiv. Forget about the situation where it's spilled. Remember the case where it's spilled and you're not sure. For there, you can for sure rely that if you at least had roiv, remember the case of nishpach, that it would be okay. Here, v'shas adachak, if you have roiv, you could be soymech on that. It would be okay too. So that's an interesting point about the gid adesher sheni moyach. That was the second point. But the third point that I wanted to talk about is the Poiskim talk a little bit about is what's going on over here? What happened to Hanan? Isn't this an Isur Davuk? Mechaber doesn't hold Hanan b'shar Isurim, so we understand why he just let it go.
Yeah, but Hanan is so
Wow.
but
Shouldn't you need shishim against the whole? In other words, everything together. Yeah, that's another question that came up over here. What about Hanan? With a yerech, with the shuman together. So some sort of an isur davuk. So you will need against the whole gid, not just against the whole shuman. And that's what the shach and taz and grow right, the chavas das. But the Minchas Yaakov, I believe, says that we're not machmir here on the gid anoshe more than the shuman. In other words, because of the shuman, to say that the whole thing is a isur davuk, it's a hanan. The whole thing is a derabbanan, so you're not going to say hanan on this kind of a situation.
in other words, the Hanan would be a result. And here we're talking, no. I mean, either
because of an isur davuk, yeah.
So
And
by
since
Chelev, you say Hanan.
Yeah,
Chelev,
right.
Because of the taste will spread and become trapped in the piece it's attached to.
right, but here since the gid does not have nois and tam anyway,
Right.
so what are you going to be machmir more on the gid because of the shuman? I mean, the whole thing is too much of a chumrah to be machmir because of the shuman. We're machmir to be machmir also on the gid when the gid doesn't have any tam. But I found a very interesting question on this whole seif that we still have to figure out what the halacha would be. There is a din in Kuf Beis I think is it, no, or maybe is it later? Kuf Hey. Let me see real quickly here. Let's see. I think it's in Kuf Hey, yeah. Yeah, it must be, yeah. Yeah, it's Kuf Hey, towards the end. Yeah. This Yerach with Gida Noshe, Shuman, it should be usher by now to begin with because it was Maluach together. Before they cooked it, they salted it. And Melicha asers at least, Kedei Klipo, Kedei Netila, according to some, the whole thing would be usher. It would depend on how you hold. Melicha itself, the salting of the Yerach, Aser is already something here. So nobody talked. I mean, I saw the question, somebody bring up the question here, but it's interesting that, that would supposedly would already be an issue. But if you hold it's only a clip, if it's only a minute thing, maybe it wouldn't be.
Can you matter the issue?
Can you what?
Could figure out a way, sorry, to dissolve the animal. Would you be able to matter?
Well, you can't be mevatel the isur lechatchila. Remember?
Right, I understand that. I'm just wondering if this was to happen.
Then it's not a din birya.
Then it'd be birya.
There won't be a din, right? All right, let's just finish up a little bit so we can, because they're not too difficult, and like this we can continue Thursday into something else. K'deira shel morok shenofel sham birya v'nevda osur akol. So if you have a pot of soup that a birya was lost and you cannot see it, not identified, then the whole thing is asur. That we know because of the din of birya, right? And it was. There's one exception to this halacha. If you can make sinun, if there's any way that you can filter out the isser, you're welcome to try. Some people may not want to eat the soup anyway, regardless. So don't tell them the spider fell in. If you tell anybody at the table, they won't want to eat it. So if you know that you can filter it out, go ahead and filter it out. But the last halacha is a very interesting one, and that's what we're going to be spending more time on. Yirakas mevushalos. You cooked vegetables. Shenimtzu bahem shalosh tolaim. You found 3 worms. Hayirakas asurim. The yirakas are asur. But I found the worms. I'm not going to eat them. I'm going to throw them away. Why? Now, once you found 3, there's a chazaka. 3 is the magic number over here. Some say 2 is, but we hold 3. So 3 is a magic number here. If you find 3, there's a chazaka. It's like similar to finding bugs that you have to right now really throw out the whole thing or check. There's a chazaka that it's infested. It's called infestation. So the yirakas are surim, aval mei hashloko is the rest of the stew or the liquid. Mesananon, you filter out the mutarim and then they're okay. V'chein basar, yechatzeno, if you find it on meat, you can wash it out. V'ivdekeno, and you should check it. Umutar. If you're talking about toiloim, that is, because toiloim can be found, certain bugs cannot be found, and therefore, if you found certain bugs, it would be a birya, it would be asur. But toiloim, if you find them, you can be mesanan, you can wash it out, and you're okay. Now, so there's a very interesting, very, very interesting question over here that I still need to look into, but I liked the question very, very much. And it has to do with the halachas of toiloim, which you will find in, one second. For the most, pay dalet for the most part of taloyim, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. It's a very fascinating topic because you got to watch it. Sometimes, if you eat a bug, it is more serious than eating a piece of bacon. There could be up to 6 transgressions for eating of certain bugs. So you want to not eat bugs, and you have to be very careful. So the question over here is as follows. I saw a very interesting question. Anytime there's a doubt of a birya, if there's any doubt, as you know, we've said that a doubt in the birya is a doubt of the Rabbanan. It's a suffix the Rabbanan, right? The Gabi Bittul only. But wait a minute, but there's a Sfex Feika here. The Sfex Feika is really the Shach brings down in Hilkos Toiloyim. If you ever have a doubt of a bug, is there a bug or not, you really have a Sfex Feika. Safek, if there is a bug. And even if you want to say there was a bug, maybe it's already completely gone, disfigured. It lost the birya, it lost its chashivas. Sfex Feika.
It's so small?
What?
Is that because it's so small, disfigured or not?
No, you can. It's a suffix. Even if you say there was.
It's after it's been cooked.
Yeah.
And you don't have it in front of
And
you.
you don't have it in front of you, yeah. So you should, maybe you always can use this, apply this sfeika. Maybe you had it, maybe you didn't have it. And if you had it, maybe it's disfigured. So anyway, I think the Pri Megadim speaks about this. There's something called the Sofek HaShokul, which we'll eventually learn in Hilchos Taaruvot when we learn about sfeika, which is a big topic in itself. It has to be a Sofek HaShokul. One of the conditions for sfeika, for it to be a real good suffix, to be considered a double suffix, has to be Sofek HaShokul, which we'll explain another time. A reasonable good suffix that really can be applied in sfeika. And therefore, since this is not necessarily a Sofek HaShokul, maybe that's why you can't use it. But it's a very interesting question that maybe if we have more time, we'll discuss it on Thursday. The only thing that I left out, which is an interesting rashba, is about the plita into the kedera. When we have 60 against any plita of a birya, we don't have to worry about the kedera so much. The plita of the birya has a problem of bitul. The plita does not have a din of the birya itself. And as far as the blias in the kedera, it could be pogum anyway, depending what you cooked up over here. So you don't really have an issue here of whether the pots now have to be kashered or not, depending on exactly what you cooked.
If it wasn't a tasty thing.
Exactly. So that's another interesting idea, is that even though you may have trouble there because of the din of birya, you may not have the trouble with the plita, or at least not as much, and for sure not in the blias if it's something which is not
Because the blias, by the
tasty.
time it becomes blias, it's certainly not a birya anymore.
Right.
Plita?
What has been emitted, the flavors of the birya, yeah, because the birya in itself has a din.
Not the tam or the liquids?
The tam and the
The
liquid.
liquids also.
Also, everything that has been emitted from the birya does not have the same din as the birya.
You need
Yes, in the pot itself, unless it's something like the Shach says, it's a tam pogum. And the same.
How would we know whether it was Tom?
No, so we will talk about them. There are certain food items, certain creatures that are pogum. There's two kinds of pgimas. I'm talking about Nois and Tam and Pgam. There's two kinds. One that in its essence is pogum to begin with, and one is when you cook it with some other food, it makes that food pogum, like whiskey and wine. The wine will make the whiskey pogum. The wine is not pogum. It does. Wine makes whiskey,
not kosher.
especially those who are very.
not kosher ones.
I could see how whiskey could make wine pug.
Also,
But I would think that wine would make you more tasty.
so that's questionable. That's the question that we had.
Or why is it
Anything
pogum?
would
I
make
don't
whiskey
understand.
more tasty.
Well, yeah,
That's a question.
that's the question.
of how-
Depends on who's al tam bereach and nitvakeach, right? So that's an example of something that is not pogum but can make something pogum. But
You
then
say
you
it's pogum because it's just a taste? Is that your time?
no, it actually ruins it. It actually, yeah. And then you have things that are pogum in itself, regardless. They're always pogum in itself. And obviously these things make a difference, in the halacha of vitul or not. I mean, you don't want to have it. I mean, it's not just going to be bottled, but concerning everything else, it's tam, this pogum. And the same with blias that were there overnight for 24 hours. It's a small pgam, but nevertheless it's called a pgam.
His question about a tasty bug, how would we know whether to begin with?
Ask the kfela.
Yeah,
Okay, all right. That's
yeah,
Maybe a French cafe.
right.
If I can, one last question.
Yeah, sure. Uh-huh.
Let's talk about something they say, Gid Asha, that guidance is being about, and they say the outer Gid and the Rabbanan.
Right.
What is
Because
that?
that has to do with the Ramah. The Ramah says the Iker Gid Hanoshe Eno Ela Kaf Bilvad, which we already discussed. The actual kaf, I don't know how they call
This
that.
is a different Gid and Asha? This is
Yeah,
a
the
different-
outer. It's an outer part of it.
Is it-
It's part of the same thing, but it's not the Iker. It's only Asher Midrabanan.
The rice aser Gidanashe is a particular section of the Asher.
Right, the kaf.
Defined by its location in the animal.
Yes, and it's a certain size. Karoichav Dalet its boys he brings down here. So outside of that, it travels together with the gid. It does go along. I think I don't know if it goes along the entire length, but it does go along a certain length with the rest of the gid. That's only Osher Midrabanan, because when they take it out, they take out the whole thing together. But the Iker is only the kaf, as he calls it. a certain part of the gid that is wider. Yeah, and that's of course also midoraisa. It's a very unique iser, and even though it doesn't have any flavor, it's also, and it has a din of a birya because of what it represents. It's something also even from the start, as we said. Nevertheless, there's no nice and tam, so at least you're safe with that. That, by the way, that's why one of the reasons Ashkenazim don't eat the back part of the meat is because it's very expensive, very hard to find the gid and take him out from both sides, both legs.
Also ruins
If you don't know how to cut it, you're going to ruin the meat. Yeah, you got to take out the whole thing, not just part of it. So those who know how to make nikr, good nikr, of course you can have filet mignon. But otherwise, they used to either not buy the back or sell it to the goy. But
That's not here.
You know why the back is much tastier than the front? My father-in-law, which I'll explain to you, he's a butcher. The front of the animal is always more muscular because it's doing all the work. So it's harder. Whereas the back of the animal is not doing as much of the work, softer. Yeah. Something like that. Yeah.
So an Ashkenazi could go to a Sephardi place and...
Yeah, if it's a reliable hashgacha.
No, reliable.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. Yeah.
You went through this one, David.
Yeah.
You ever heard this part?
No.
Yeah.
I didn't either.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a question
You
because
don't do it here though, in America. Sorry.
in America you won't find it, but in other countries you will find it. So technically, if it's 100% reliable hashgacha, the animal is kosher. Just that we have, I mean, the Ashkenazim who follow the Ramah have a takana of not eating from the animal. But if you were to find somebody who knows how to do it, how far do you make the decree? Is it something it's not completely usher? It's only that we don't know and we don't do it. Yeah.
Then he said, Sephardi, you got to take it out.
Right, by the Persians, they had to know how to take it out. Yeah, I don't know if that applied to everything, but chalev, of course, requires a lot of knowledge to knock at the chalev. Yeah, and the blood vessels that are still there. There's a lot of work.
I learned that stuff. I mean, here it seems like so arcane what we're learning this. But before all the butchers bring everything up, drop a piece of meat home, you had to worry about chalev.
Yeah, sure.
In the olden days, you had to worry about chalev all the time, right?
Yeah. So anyway, just to finish up over here, we'll go over a little bit on Thursday and go on to Kuf Aleph. All these items that are not Batul Be'elef, the not being Batul Be'elef is a Rambanan. So therefore, if any kind of doubt ever arises, it will continue to be a Safek Rambanan. That's just important to remember, even though we said, this is something so strict, I feel Be'elef, but don't worry. If there's any time any kind of a suffix related to this, it's still going to be a suffix Rabbanan.
It is self-Rabbanan.
The whole shir is a Rabbanan. Yeah. So Mr. Shah will continue on Thursday.